So we're reading chapter 9 of Primitive Mythology by Joseph Campbell. We're on section 2, the stage of Pithecanthropus, 400,000 BC. The first evidence of the use of fire was found about as far from South Africa as one could wish, in the now famous Choukotian cave, some 37 miles from Peiping. Here, through a series of excavations from 1921 to 1939, there was unearthed an impressive assortment of stone tools, cracked skulls, split bones, and fireplaces in what had been the haunt of a sort of ape-man with a brain capacity of about 900 cubic centimeters. That is to say, midway between the men of today, 1,400 to 1,500 cubic centimeters average, and the brainiest ape, 600 cubic centimeters. The way some of the skulls were opened show that someone had been knocking holes in them and lapping out the brains. In the cave were the remains, furthermore, of thousands of animals that had also been eaten by the inhabitant or inhabitants. And the tools of stone were crude choppers and large flakes, such as must have been used for knives. The unwholesome cannibal of this chilly fire-heated den, Sinanthropus pekinensis, Peking Man, or as we may term him, Prometheus the Great, was a contemporary of the celebrated Pithecanthropus erectus of Java, the ape-man, Pithecanthropus, who walks erect, erectus, otherwise known as Java Man and Trino Man, who, when his remains were found in 1891, was hailed by Haeckel and the other 19th century prophets of evolution as the very figure of Darwin's missing link. But the remarkable thing about the Chinese find was the evidence of fire in the cave. For although a number of proto-human remains of this general period have been found elsewhere in the world, Choukotian is unique in its evidence of fire. We have to think of the period in the vast terms of geological reckoning as falling somewhere in the Middle Pleistocene, about 500,000 to 200,000 BC. In the great ranges of the Second Glacial period, Mindel, and the Second Interglacial, Mindel-Riss. The chief remains now assigned to this stage in the development of mankind are those, firstly, of Pithecanthropus and his like in Java, which now include, in addition to the original find, a massive, brutal skull discovered by Ralph von Koenigswald in the 1930s, which is named Pithecanthropus robustus, as well as a huge lower jaw, also found in Java by the same researcher, which is now called Meganthropus paleojavanicus. Likewise, to be classed in this period are the remains of a skull from East Africa that has been dubbed Africanthropus. And then, of course, we have the classic relics of the early Paleolithic in Europe, with which every schoolboy is now familiar, most notably Heidelberg Man, Homo heidelbergensis, whose mighty jaw was discovered in 1907 in a deposit that is now assigned to the first interglacial period, Gunz-Mindel, an age in which the bear, lion, wildcat, wolf, and bison shared with man the fields and forests along with the wild boar, the Mosbach horse, the broad-faced moose, Etruscan rhinoceros, and straight-toothed ancient elephant. Perhaps also from this period are the interesting Swanscombe skull from the Thames, which was found in 1935 and is probably to be dated in the Second Interglacial, the Fontechevade skull found in France in 1947, which appears to belong to the early part of the Third Interglacial, Risch Worm, and the skull of a young woman found in a cave at Steinheim, Germany in 1933, which likewise appears to be from the Third Interglacial. These latter three, however, have aroused considerable controversy, since they approach far more closely than the Oriental finds the figure of modern man. One side of the argument holds that skulls of this advanced type belong to later periods than those to which their position, when found, appeared to assign them. The other side contends that two separate strains of evolution are indicated, one developing in the less favorable Pleistocene climates of Southeast and Far Eastern Asia, and the other in the milder spheres of North Africa and Europe. This argument is still unresolved. What is perfectly clear, however, is that the race of man by the middle of the Second Interglacial period, Mittelriss, Mindelriss, had spread from Africa both northward into Europe and eastward, remaining south of Elbur's Himalayan mountain line, into Southeast Asia, turning then northward up the far eastern coast. Father Wilhelm Schmidt has even suggested the possibility of a continuation of this migration into America. For as he points out, during the glacial ages, the level of the sea was so much lower than now that a land bridge as wide as the nation of France stretched from Siberia to Alaska, across which grazing animals passed, herds of horses, cattle, elephants, and camels. But if animals, then why not their hunters? The land bridge holding back the icy waters of the Arctic permitted the warmer currents of the south to flow unhindered up the coast, so that the climate both of Northeast Asia and Northwest America must have been considerably warmer than today. And Father Schmidt cites to this effect the geologist Dr. W. Krickeberg. An abundant forest and steppe flora flourished then, where today barren grounds give to the landscape the basic character of a hopeless desert. And this we know since the immigrating Asiatic animal world of the second half of the Ice Age, in whose train, according to this hypothesis, men also came, consisted only to a minor degree of Arctic types. Greatest number were the beasts of the northern forests and steppes, among others the mammoth, whose contemporary man must likewise have entered the North American sphere. No evidence yet of Paleolithic man in America can be dated, even recklessly, earlier than the Third Interglacial period, Rift-Worm. But new discoveries during the past few years have been pressing the date line steadily back. In 1925, Dr. Elise Hildlicka was suggesting something like 1000 BC as a likely date for man's arrival in the New World. Now we have a date of 6688 plus or minus 450 BC. For a man in Tierra del Fuego, in 1926, a Paleolithic type of spear point, the Folsom Point, was discovered in New Mexico in association with an extinct species of bison. The favored date for this point is circa 10,000 BC. But two earlier types of point, Sandia and Clovis flutes, have been found associated with mammoth remains, calling for a date of at least circa 15,000 BC. The conservative estimates now run up to 35,000 BC, and some are even prophesying that the next few years will show the presence of man on this continent long before the end of the Pleistocene. All of which, of course, is still a long way indeed from the 400,000 BC of Peking. And I am not trying to suggest that the gap will ever be bridged, but what is of interest to our study is the opening, in Father Schmidt's suggestion, of a possible channel of Paleolithic influence from Southeast Asia and the Austro-Melanesian zone up the coast into the New World. A number of careful scholars of the subject have pointed to signs of an extremely early continuity uniting not only culturally but also racially certain peoples of the Southeast Asian area and the most primitive groups in America. The Argentinian anthropologist Jose Imbelloni, for example, recognizes Tasmanoid, Tasmanian-like, strain, a Tasmanoid strain in the Yagans and Alacaluf of Tierra del Fuego, a Melanesian strain among the Indians of the Mato of the Amazon forest and a semi-australoid among the nomadic huntsmen of both North and South America. Harold S. Gladwin writes of australoid skulls discovered all the way from Lower California to the Texas Gulf Coast, as well as in Ecuador and Brazil. And Paul Rivet even suggests the possibility of an australoid migration by way of the ice of Antarctica to Tierra del Fuego. The point to be noticed here is that if any such early Paleolithic Southeast Asia to Tierra del Fuego continuity should ever be demonstrated, then the last possibility of anything like a pure case for parallel development, even on the simplest level of culture, will have been removed. On the face of the evidence, it would surely seem that our ponderous Prometheus with the heavy brows was the world's perfect model of an economic materialist, which is about what one should have expected considering the size of the brain. For there is not the sign or hint of an artwork to be found in the whole 300,000 years of his existence. He was Homo faber, man the toolmaker par excellence, and the manner in which his skill increased in the not too easy task of chipping flints from the days of his first crude pebble tools to those of his finest fist axes reveals that for all his rude and even ghoulish habits, he was no unmitigated lout. The high center of human culture was still Africa. Here an incredible abundance of Paleolithic tools have been found. Indeed, some excavations, for example those of L.S.B. Leakey at Olduvai Gorge north of Tanganyika, have revealed in perfect sequence every stage of the evolution of the hand axe, from the pebble tools of man's first beginnings to the finely finished, really elegant axes of the period of Neanderthal. And if the view into the depth of the well of time that we obtained in the south of France was great, this Olduvai is simply beyond speech. But what is even more amazing than the profundity of the prehistoric past here illustrated is the broad diffusion over the face of the earth of exactly the same axe forms as those of Paleolithic East Africa. As Dr. Carlton S. Kuhn has remarked, during the 250,000 years when man made these tools, the style changed very little. But what changes were made are to be seen everywhere. This means that human beings who lived 500,000 years ago were able to teach their young skills that they had learned from their fathers in the most minute detail, as living Australians and Bushmen do. Such teaching requires both speech and a firm discipline, and the uniformity of hand axe styles over wide areas means that members of neighboring groups must have met together at stated intervals to perform together acts that required the use of these objects. In short, human society was already a reality when the hand axe choppers of the world had begun to turn out a uniform product. All of which speaks volumes for the force and reach of diffusion in the primitive world. Moreover, what is perhaps more remarkable still is that some of the most beautiful of the symmetrically chipped hand axes of this period are as much as 2 feet long, a size too cumbersome for practical use, the only possible conclusion being that they must have served some ceremonial function. Professor Kuhn has suggested that such axes were not practical tools but sacred objects, comparable to the ceremonial tools and weapons of later days, used only seasonally when wild food was abundant enough to support hundreds of persons at one place and one time. Then the old men, he supposes, would cut the meat for the assembled multitude with some of these heavy and magnificent tools, after which, like the magically powerful jeringas of the Australians, the sacred implements would be stored in some holy place. That's the end of part 2. Next time we'll start part 3.